Okay. Okay, so listen, I guess maybe, Jerry, what do you think? Should we get started?
I think so. It's 7:03.
Okay, great.
And, we've got enough participants here to get started.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So listen, welcome everybody this evening to Long Island Activists and Peers Town Hall with Assemblymember Fred Thiele on the Invest in Our New York campaign. We're happy that you're joining us. And if you haven't already put in the chat, please drop in the town that you're joining us from in New York. It's nice to know who's with us. My name is Catherine Soka, and I'm co-chair of PEER, Progressive East End Reformers. PEER and Long Island Activists are the co-sponsors for tonight, and we are both members or chapters of New York Progressive Action Network, NYPAN, a statewide organization. Both Long Island Activists and PEER are multi-issue grassroots organizations committed to working for justice for all through electoral politics and issue-oriented engagements. I also want to thank our co-sponsors tonight. We have a number of them: Alliance for Quality Education, East End Action Network, Solidarity Sundays East End, and the Southampton Town Democrats. So I want to start with just a description of what tonight's forum will be like and what the format is. First of all, we're going to dig deep into why passing the Invest in Our New York bills are really essential to the average New Yorker, the 99% of us, and all of our state municipalities. We know that the gap between the super wealthy and the rest of us has grown exponentially in the past decades. And as the 1%ers and their wealth has skyrocketed, their tax rate has stayed low, shifting the budget burden in New York to the working and middle-class families and to municipal governments. So as our Assemblymember Fred Thiele said in a recent op-ed, income inequality is the most serious economic and social issue facing our state and our nation. Joining Fred tonight, we have an intimate panel of experts. We will hear from each of them first they'll give us an introductory comments. Then Jerry Maslanka, who is PEER's Invest in Our New York liaison, will moderate a Q&A with them, after which we will go to your questions. So please post them in the chat. Julie Sheehan, a PEER member and of the core, will monitor the chat and facilitate the question and answer afterwards. Then we will close with actions that you can take to support passing the Invest in Our New York bills. So someone, maybe Joe Sackman, will drop in the chat the link to Fred's op-ed if it's not already there, so that you can grab that link and read that later. It's absolutely worthwhile. So for the introductions, starting with Assemblymember Fred Thiele. Fred is a lifelong resident of Sag Harbor. He's been a member of the Assembly since 1995, representing our 2nd District. Prior to that, he served as a Southampton Town Attorney, Suffolk County Legislator, and Southampton Town Supervisor. Fred is incredibly responsible to his constituents, which is one reason why he's here today. He's truly one of the best public servants I've encountered in my involvement in politics. Fred currently sits on these House committees, get ready: Education, Election Law, Environmental Conservation, Oversight, Transportation, and Ways and Means. He is responsible for and the original sponsor of the hugely successful Community Preservation Fund, and has been instrumental in its enactment, implementation, and continued adaptation to reflect the times and the needs of our community. We have a Hampton Bays native with us tonight, Superintendent Lars Clemensen. Lars is superintendent of the Hampton Bays School District and has held that position since 2010. His educational career began after college when he entered the Teach for America program and was stationed in Paterson, New Jersey. Lars rose to the executive director of the New Jersey branch of Teach for America. And in 2006, he came back to Hampton Bays as an assistant principal in the secondary school. Was then appointed principal of the district's middle school when it opened in 2008, until he was appointed superintendent in 2010. He's the proud father of a 5-year-old son, and just last week, he welcomed into the world an infant daughter, Mogan May. Congratulations. Also on the panel is Dr. Steve Auerbach, who is giving COVID shots today. Steve is a retired public health physician and pediatrician. He is a board member of the New York Metro chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program. Dr. Auerbach studied epidemiology at Columbia Public Health, and he has worked for many years as a medical epidemiologist, both nationally and internationally. Representing the Invest in Our New York campaign tonight is Melanie D'Arrigo. Melanie is a former congressional candidate for the 3rd District of New York and has worked as a healthcare professional. Melanie is an active member of the Nassau Now, Long Island activists, and Moms Demand Action. Finally, Jerry Maslanka, our moderator this evening, is a former chief operating officer for a successful retail startup. She is a member of PEER and our liaison to the Invest in Our New York campaign. Her grave concern for the severe economic inequalities in our country, and particularly our state, drew her to this effort. So she's going to get us started. I'm going to turn this over to Jerry, and I'll just ask everybody, please keep yourself muted if you wouldn't mind during the program. And thank you all for being here.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'd also like to add my thank you to all of you for being here to learn more about something that has become near and dear to my heart. So, Melanie, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your overview of the campaign?
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry, and thank you, Catherine, for having me. Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. I'm very excited to be here tonight. Just going to share my screen for a moment and cue us up. All right. My name is Melanie D'Arrigo. As Catherine said, I'm a former congressional candidate for the 3rd District of New York, and I've been doing many of the teach-ins across Long Island, along with Joe Sackman, my partner in crime, to help spread the word about this fantastic campaign. Decades of disinvestment in New York has led to the worst inequality of any other state. I want to just show you this quick slide before I get into the bills, because I think it really helps set this stage, and it's so important to understand why we need the Invest in Our New York Act. In the post-war period from 1945 to 1973, income growth grew at relatively the same rate, whether you were rich or you were poor. But from 2009 to 2015, the top 1% has captured over 50% of all income growth, and it continues to grow. I shudder to think what this chart may look like next year, where we know in this past year during the pandemic, where we were losing our jobs, our health insurance, and many of us faced food insecurity, that billionaires in our country grew their wealth by over $1 trillion. But there is good news. We are here to talk about the Invest in Our New York Act today, which has over 90% support of New Yorkers across party lines. Because what New Yorkers know is that when it comes to deciding if we should raise taxes on middle-class families and cut essential services, or raise taxes on the ultra wealthy to just make and create a more fair tax system, the choice is very, very clear. It is time to fix our tax structure and make it more equitable for all New Yorkers. And so, some of us might be thinking, well, where does the money come from? So I want to just set the stage here a little bit. New York has the largest economy in the United States. It has the 10th largest economy in the world. And in 2019, it had a 1.8 trillion GDP. So the good news is that New York has the money. I know we all heard the good news today that the COVID relief bill was finally passed, and New York State will likely be getting some really important aid. I just want to take a quick second to thank Assemblyman Thiele for writing his op-ed, because what he so aptly pointed out was, even if we do get the aid that might cover the budget deficit this year, over the next 4 years, New York has a $63 billion deficit ahead. So it is really important that New York take care and step up for, our legislature step up for New Yorkers and create, a tax structure system that will allow us to not only recover, but to thrive beyond recovery. So I'm here to tell you that this is the way forward. The Invest in Our New York Act is comprised of 6 bills that will raise between $51 and $75 billion annually. You heard that right, between $51 and $75 billion annually. Let's expand that pie so we don't have to fight over the crumbs. Sorry, the first bill that we're going to talk about tonight is creating a progressive income tax system. Currently, New York has a very flat, or what we call a regressive tax. This is a really important chart that I'd like to share, because the last time our tax structure was recalibrated was 1972. So you'll notice those 4 vertical lines leading up to $21,000. Those vertical lines represent a tax break. In 1972, $21,000 was a livable and, in fact, a very good wage. And what happens is $1 million was virtually unheard of. So the tax structure is flat. But as we've seen much growth with wealth, and where millionaires are much more prevalent today, they end up paying less overall than middle class workers. So it's important to note with this particular tax, because I know we start to get our hearts fluttering when we think, oh no, raise my taxes. This bill is designed to just progressively tax. So if you're making a lot of money, you're going to pay a little bit more money. So if you're making $300,000 in this bill, you will pay $0 more in New York State income tax. If you make $400,000, you'll pay $650 a year. Where this tax really starts to make sense: if you're making $100 million annually, you will pay $5 million under this bill. $5 million sounds like a lot, but if you're making $100 million a year, it's not that much, and definitely needs to go back into the state to fix, for our infrastructure, healthcare, housing needs, etc. This second bill is an investment income, a taxing investment income, which is also known as capital gains. Very wealthy people, and I'm talking about like the top 1%, they end up making most of their income through investments or capital gains. If you look at this chart here, the top 0.1% makes only about 20% of their annual income from wages. So it's like our paychecks, right? 80% is coming from investment income. Even the top 1%, about 20% of their income is coming from investment income. But the bottom 99% of us, we're mostly just making our income from wages. And unfortunately, the way the federal government tax investment income is much, much less than the way our wages are. The way our wages are taxed. So what this bill does, it seeks to remedy the inequalities of our system and restructure the capital gains tax so that everybody is paying the same tax, whether you are making your money just from your paycheck or you're making the majority of your money from investment income. And so just for a quick example, if you are in, let's say, the highest tax bracket and you're paying 37% tax, the current capital gains tax would only have you paying about 22%. So this bill would equalize it, so you're paying the same tax rate whether you're earning your wages or you're getting income from investments. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to shut that off. I apologize. Oops, sorry guys. Shoot. Oh boy, hold on one second. I just lost my slides. There we go. Apologies. I don't know how to shut my messages off. There we go. Okay, so bill number 3. This bill would create a meaningful inheritance tax. So currently large inheritances, which is essentially unearned income, right? They're gifts. They end up pooling billions in the hands of people who didn't earn it. Oh gosh, guys, can you all hear that? I'm so sorry. Are you hearing those beeps?
It's okay.
I'm sorry. I really apologize about that. Okay, so important to note about the inheritance tax. 80% of New Yorkers do not receive an inheritance at all. And of those, 99% receive an inheritance less than $200,000. This particular tax wouldn't kick in until you were receiving an inheritance of $250,000 in income or more. And even at that, the taxes stay relatively low until you get into the, the upper millions. Also important is that this tax would exempt family homes up to $2 million. It exempts family farms as well as pensions and retirement funds. Bill number 4, this would amend New York's constitution to allow for a wealth tax. So essentially, this would be a billionaire tax, right? Billionaires end up having these very large stock portfolios. And when they sell their assets, they're appreciated, right? They make money on them. But because it's currently considered intangible income, we cannot tax it. So this bill would seek to remedy that. So when they do, make income off of selling an asset, we would be able to tax it. And this would come in the form of a yearly income tax. Okay, now bill number 6, this is the last bill. This would offset Trump's corporate tax cuts. And this is pretty easy for us all to understand. We remember not too long ago when the GOP, passed the jobs and tax cuts, right? And they weren't really jobs, but what it really did was it was a massive giveaway for corporations. So this bill would just bring it back to, before that tax was enacted and would allow businesses to pay what they used to pay. Just a quick note, and I apologize with all the beeping I got thrown off. I just want to mention this with the capital. Did we skip a bill? I feel like I skipped one. I did skip one.
Number 5.
Sorry, is it not? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, guys. I got a little thrown off there with all the beeping. I apologize. So let me introduce this real quick. Bill number 5 would reinstitute a financial transactions tax. This would be on things like stocks and trades and bonds and derivatives. Now, interestingly, taxes like this already exist in London and Hong Kong. And we actually do have a piece of this on the books right here in New York. We have a stock transfer tax, but as of, I believe it was 1982, it started getting rebated. So the tax exists and then it's rebated right back. This is, I think, a really important bill that would allow Wall Street to give back to us for once, right? We've bailed them out now quite a few times. So this is really important and would raise between $12 and $29 billion. What's important to note is that each tax, we're talking about less than 1/2% of a tax. And this is really targeted at those, those major monster traders who are trading thousands and thousands of trades each hour, right? And ultimately, this tax should stabilize the market and make it safer for long-term investors, which is good news for the middle class and folks who are trying to save up for retirement. Really quickly, though, I want to go back and then I'll hands over what I wanted to just touch on that I didn't with the with taxing investment income. This tax will not affect anyone who's making less than $150,000 as a single filer or $250,000 as a married couple. So there's definitely a big window there before this tax starts to kick in. Okay, I am done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I really apologize, everyone, for those beeps. I'm going to figure out how to get that off my computer. But thank you so much. I hope that was helpful.
Great. That gives us the overall picture. Thank you so much, Melanie. Fred, so let's hear from you and talk about why you're supporting this Invest in Our New York campaign. Oh, you're on mute. The famous.
Thank you. I always say that the 3 most overused words since 2020, the first one is unprecedented and the other 2 are please unmute. And I fell victim to that again tonight. And I just wanted to thank all the sponsors, first of all, for sponsoring this. It's obviously very, very timely. And and I'm going to try to set the table a little bit here in New York State. We are right in the midst of our budget process in New York. The governor presents his executive budget proposal in middle January. The legislature then begins to hold public hearings. We do that throughout February, and we've completed that process. And the next step in the process is for the Senate and the Assembly to come up with one House budget bills. And we'll have the governor's proposal, we'll have the Assembly proposal, we'll have the Senate proposal, and then we will go forward with conference committees that hopefully will yield a budget by April 1st. So literally next week, we're doing one House budget bills in both the Senate and in the Assembly. So these are items that are going to be discussed in great detail. In fact, I thought I might be able to share with you what was discussed in the majority conference, because we were supposed to discuss revenue today. But if you read the papers, other things have taken up our time, and that discussion is going to be actually going to be tomorrow on revenue. And so let's get to it about revenue. And you know, I think it's a well-known fact now that the state of New York, largely because of the pandemic, is, for this budget cycle alone, the current fiscal year we're in and the one we are budgeting for, we have a $15 billion budget hole that needs to be filled. And there's been a lot of actions taken. We've seen money withheld from school districts, money withheld from not-for-profits, all trying to limit our budget deficit. So there's been a lot of pain before we even got to this budget process, and with the governor's office basically withholding spending and withholding funding from a whole host of different programs, much in the way of local aid. So. And as was stated, Melanie stated, as you project out the budget over a 4-year period, we're going to have about somewhere in the neighborhood of a $60 to $65 billion budget hole that needs to be filled. So, that's the nature of the problem. And, so that's number one. The second thing I would say is we, with the new administration and the American Recovery Act that the President of the United States signed today, that is a great help to state government, to local government, to school districts. We would have had to decimate services in the state of New York, impacting school districts, impacting healthcare, if we did not get some assistance from the federal government. New York State is estimated to get, for the state government, is estimated to get about $12 billion from the federal stimulus bill. Local governments will get another in the neighborhood of about 11 billion. So this is going to be a great help with us dealing with the budget problems coming from the pandemic. But it doesn't solve our problem completely. And that's really the issue, is we're going about trying to put a one House budget bill. We recognize that the federal money that we're going to get, it's a one shot. It's one time. And then and I think in New York, we're going to be looking at trying to spread that $12 billion out over a 2-year period. But, it's going to take longer than that to recover from the economic impact of the pandemic. So, first and foremost, what I would say is that the federal stimulus bill, the American Recovery Act, great for state and local governments, great, I think, for the country, necessary to help us recover from the pandemic, but it doesn't solve all our problems. And as we're budgeting in New York State, we're trying to recognize those are it's a one-time benefit to the state of New York, one-time revenue, but at the same time, we're going to try to apply that money to our one-time expenses. We're going to have to help small businesses recover, restaurants, small businesses. We have an enormous housing problem with an enormous amount of money that tenants are going to owe once the moratorium on evictions is away. So we're going to try to match the federal money that we get, which is a one shot, to those one shot expenses. But things such as school aid, things such as Medicaid costs that are recurring. They need to have recurring expenses, need to have recurring revenues. And I think we can't solve our problems solely with the federal one shot. We're going to need revenue to be able to do that. I'll give you one example. Lars Clemensen, superintendent at Hampton Bays, he'll speak more about what the impact is going to be for school aid. But before there was a pandemic, with regard to foundation aid and school aid, which was supposed to equalize, supposed to make sure that every resident in New York State, every school child has an equal opportunity, equal quality. And the foundation formula is supposed to do that. Lars's district in Hampton Bays is only getting 40% of the money that they're supposed to get under the foundation formula because it's never been fully funded. So, just an example there. So, we need to be planning not just how are we going to get through this fiscal year and the next one we're budgeting for, but how are we going to deal with the longer term impacts of the pandemic. And that's why, I think, number one, why we need to look at revenue. And those revenues, Main Street has suffered, Wall Street, not so much. The Dow Jones hit another milestone yesterday, I think over 32,000 on the Dow Jones. So as we try to get through these troubles, those who have still benefited perhaps are those that should be paying. And, as was mentioned, New York has one of the flattest income taxes there are out there. This is an opportunity, I think, to make that more progressive. So one is our immediate budget issues and what we're going to be confronting in the next couple of years, and the need for revenue and the need to do that in a progressive fashion. And second, as I mentioned, is I think a longer term issue that we've seen with income inequality, not just in New York State, but across the nation. We've seen the struggle of the middle class and the loss of the middle class. We've seen the concentration in wealth and, several major corporations and things of that nature. This is an opportunity, I think, to not just come out of the pandemic and meet the needs that we have, but also to have a fairer tax code than we have now. And it's really those things that really were the instigator for me to want us to be part of this. We're talking about different proposals, and I'm sure we can get into the specifics of each of them. But in Albany, we're part of a process now, and it's going to be a negotiation, and there's going to be the need for consensus. I think it's important that all of these issues and all of these ideas be on the table for legislators to discuss. And ultimately, hopefully, it's a diverse state. We can come up with a package as part of our budget this year that meets the goals or starts to meet the goals that the Invest in Our New York campaign is seeking to achieve. And so that's where we are. Perhaps when we get on later, I think later on I'll have an opportunity to give maybe some predictions as to what I think will happen in the budget process. But that's kind of the overview now, and why I'm involved with this and what I think we're confronting in the state of New York. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Okay, so next we'll hear from Lars. And Lars, tell us from your perspective of being under austerity budgeting for the last over a decade. What does this mean in your area of expertise and with the schools?
Sure, Jerry, Catherine, and the folks in the organizations, please accept my thanks for including me on the panel to build off of Fred's foremost overused words. The other one is, the other five are, can you hear me okay? If you can hear me okay, I'll continue. So I'm superintendent of Hampton Bays, as Catherine mentioned in her introductions. And as I like to say, Hampton Bays is the Hamptons who works for the rest of the Hamptons. We make the East End run. We catch fish, we plumb the lines, we build your homes. We are a driver in the Hamptons. I'm proud of our working middle class community. I'm from here. And I'm raising my family in Hampton Bays as well. And when we talk about additional revenue, it does a couple of things. And Fred alluded to that one shot in the arm federal stimulus. We're super excited for that big pile of money that's coming to New York, and it's going to be well spent and invested back in the sectors that really need a restart and a booster shot. No pun intended for in the vaccination world we're in right now. But that money is going to dry up, and it reminds us of what happened after 2008 and when the ARA funds flowed to the states in the Great Recession. And those monies helped preserve jobs and programs from us in the education sector. And that money left. Money dried up. Once it was gone, it was gone. And for the next 10 years, we had in the school systems an adjustment to our state aid called the gap elimination adjustment, the GEA. So as the foundation formula and the state aid runs were prepared, you had all of these pluses of the monies you were going to get, and then you got really excited as you read down that state aid run. And then at the bottom it said gap elimination adjustment, and then there was a minus, and some money came back out of that state aid run to help fulfill the federal monies gap that and the holes that New York State was experiencing. So leading into the pandemic, schools were living in a tax cap budget, always looking for new revenue, because when you fund schools primarily two ways: property taxes and state aid. So for every dollar that doesn't come from Albany, it comes from our property taxes. And I look down on Dune Road here in Hampton Bays, and we have beautiful beaches, but I look across Shinnecock Inlet and I look at the estates, the gorgeous estates on Dune Road, and the income inequality that comes from property taxes sets school districts up for very different experiences. So tax rates vary between school districts greatly. We have among one of the highest tax rates in Southampton town, yet we spend the least per pupil because of a number of factors, including land wealth. Our homes and our tax base are primarily a quarter to a third acre homes, 3-bedroom ranches that are all sending kids to school. And so the tax base is different. So when we talk about revenues coming in from the state and the Invest in Our New York set of packages, those are dollars that would not come from that 99%, as Melanie, for the most part, as Melanie pointed out, they wouldn't be coming off the 3-bedroom ranch. They'd be coming to help support our schools. Leading into the pandemic, I'll give you a perspective of where we are as an island. Great schools on Long Island. We're very proud of our public schools. If you segment out performance and results on Long Island, and if Long Island was a state, we'd be high ranking, top 10 in basically all measurements across the United States. In the last 10 years, we've seen a 10% decline in student-aged enrollment, in school-aged enrollment on Long Island. Yet at the same time, we've seen a 68% increase in that same time period, a 68% increase in students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and a 64% increase in students who qualify for English language services. Those demographic factors cost more money to educate kids. And so when you live in a tax cap world and you live in a limited foundation aid world that is not fully funded at this time, budgets have a ceiling to them. And so a dollar that needs to be spent on a mandated service or a service for a student in need, who's economically disadvantaged, who's learning English, who might need additional remediation, enrichment, language courses, those dollars are moving away from some of the other programs that your school board or your community might be interested in. In one of the economic downturns over the last 10 years, a neighboring school district was cutting their bowling team as Hampton Bays was debating cutting kindergarten busing within the 1 mile radius. So across the street, sometimes districts are having different conversations about what services are not available. As we enter the pandemic, we know that kids have had disruptions to learning, disruptions to mental health support and ongoing counseling, and they've been socially isolated. There's increased incidence of anxiety, When home life is bad, it's even worse in a pandemic when you can't go anywhere. Continuity of basic health care, so well visits, things that are normal routine parts of our experience growing up aren't happening as regular. Significant life events, we're talking big things here, but if you stop my 17 and 18-year-olds in school and you ask what's the most important thing on their mind, it's prom. What's going to happen with prom? So you have major events, academic learning, kids who were very worried whose transcripts are going to tell an incomplete story as they graduate and they go off to school because of these big gaps that they're experiencing. Superintendents over the last few years have been surveyed at the state level, and from 2014 to 2019, it almost tripled to 2/3 of superintendents saying if they had additional money to spend in their school district, they'd spend it on mental health services for their kids. That was followed by a reduction in the property tax levy for their local community taxpayers, and then an increase in career and technical education experiences. Where have we spent money over that same period of time? Mental health services and school safety. And again, when you're in a limited ceiling of your school budget, $1 for school safety is $1 that comes away from AP physics or welding and mechanical for kids. And so we look to these revenues, and as chief officer in my school district, I'm looking to do a few things: provide that mental health support, the basic foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for kids. But I also want my kids to be competitive. And I know that in school districts, my colleague districts where the tax rates are lower and they can offer their kids enrichment activities and engineering and STEM-based experiences and all of those things, I want to be able to offer that as well. And then additional dollars would help my community taxpayers. 90 cents on the dollar comes from the taxpayer. 10 cents on the dollar comes from state aid in Hampton Bays. When the property tax relief burden is relieved off of taxpayers, sentiment and feeling and support for your school district increases. And as we're the Bayman, and so we believe a rising tide lifts all boats there. So support for schools helps kids. Those additional dollars would I could spend them in a lot of different ways. And so looking forward to answering questions. And again, thank you for having me tonight.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Lars. That was great. Okay, Steve, you're on. Please talk to us about healthcare and the IONY campaign and how these things intersect. What is it like from your perspective?
So I want to start by saying, can people hear me?
Yes.
I want to make sure we've got the unmute part of the thing fixed. So first of all, I want to start by saying that most of what Invest in Our New York is proposed for, and I should also state that it's my understanding, I'm not actually with the campaign, but it's my understanding that the campaign, although they do make suggestions of the various things it could be used for, the actual legislation does not. And so it's kind of a let's increase in a very progressive, in the economic sense, way, the annual state budget. That's the Invest in Our New York. But if you look at the things that it's for, it's mostly for things like, let's say, education, pre-K through 12 education, and funding CUNY and SUNY. And I would argue that education is part of health and healthcare. Part of it is for funding housing, more affordable housing in a variety of ways. Housing is health and healthcare. It's for funding people to have full employment and living wages. And again, those are contributors to health and healthcare. You know, we sometimes talk about the social determinants of health. And more recently, we sometimes really prefer to refer to those, because they are political choices, as political determinants of health. And if you look at the hollowing out of the middle class and the growth in income and wealth inequality since the mid-1970s, parallel to that have been lots, lots of losses by some measures in health status in the United States. So again, all of those other things, although we don't usually think of them as health care in the sense of going to see a doctor and insurance issues and all the things that the New York Health Act, something that's not tonight's subject, would do something for. We clearly see, and that's why my group supports it, in the big picture, investing in the state budget for local government services and infrastructure, education, housing, jobs, is health and healthcare related. Should also point out that one of the components in proposed in the Invest in Our New York is more directly healthcare to avoid the Medicaid cuts that Governor Cuomo proposed before the pandemic and is insisted on pursuing after the pandemic. I think it was bad policy beforehand. I think it's grossly immoral policy after the pandemic. And that's really the only one explicit clinical healthcare item. And that's out of the over 50 billion proposed to be raised in the Invest in Our New York, that would be approximately 2.5 billion. So again, a very small part of it. One part of it that could be there as part of the overall government, state and local government, and I mean county and municipality government infrastructure building, of course, are your local and state public health departments. And as we've seen with COVID, but really previous to COVID as well, we have grossly underfunded public health infrastructure. Some of you may know about Lori Garrett's, is a public health journalist that's been writing on this subject for years. Basically, as a percentage of healthcare dollars spent per GDP, the United States spends about half the amount on public health. Again, your state, your CDC at the federal level, your state Department of Health, your local county and municipality departments of health. We spend about half the amount of other Western developed capitalist countries. It went up a little bit. If you remember, at the time of the 9/11 attack, there was also the anthrax attack, and we also had avian flu, and then a big investment early in the ACA bumped that up a little bit, and has dropped back down again since then. So with the renewal of the ACA and the waning memory of anthrax and avian flu, that all dropped again. Those are the kinds of things that IONY would directly be involved in. The other kinds of things that we've seen are huge problems in basically the kind of austerity measures, short-sighted austerity measures that we've seen in New York State and nationally. In addition, include things like the way our hospitals are funded. New York State actually is the worst in the entire country in terms of misallocating what's called the indigent care pool dollars, including the federal disproportionate share dollars. Out of the 50 states in the United States, we are the only one that provides most of those dollars to hospitals that are in wealthy, highly private insured neighborhoods and not focusing on the safety net hospitals. So again, if you look just at that one thing, we're 50th out of 50, okay? Mississippi allocates its indigent care pool dollars better than New York does. And again, if you look at where hospitals and hospital bed closures have occurred, they've been disproportionately in low income areas. That's not just inner city urban, that's also rural throughout the state. It does not need to be this way. And it's been pure self-interest lobbying by the most selfish, powerful hospital interests that have resulted in that misallocation in the care pool dollars, worst in the country in New York. I do want to bring up briefly the New York Health Act. We had a wonderful presentation by this group. I hope some of you made it a couple of weeks ago. One of the hidden benefits of the New York Health Act that's not often mentioned, but is very important for Long Islanders, is the amount of savings that the New York Health Act would give to county and municipal governments. Basically in three ways. One is the New York State, the Medicaid share that the counties have to give to the state. That's eliminated. And that is on average, it varies widely from county to county, but on average, that's roughly 50% of your local homeowner real estate tax is the Medicaid share. That's eliminated. There is no more county level Medicaid share. Also, county governments themselves, of course, are employers, and to their teachers and to their police and fire departments and so on and so forth. And so as an employer, the county government spends a lot of money on the health benefits for its employees, as well as the retirement benefits, the health part of the retirement benefits. Again, all of those go away with the New York Health Act. So it's a huge boon. The New York Health Act is a huge boon to every lower level part of government. So New York Health Act is single payer for New York State, saves huge amounts of money overall, is lower costs for over 92% of households and individuals, and is a huge boon to all lower levels of government, county and local municipalities. So I think I'll stop there. And we can certainly come back to any of this in the Q&A. I've also dropped a whole bunch of links into the chat as we've gone along, answering, I think, a lot of questions about Invest in Our New York, as well as things like comparing honest, full comparison of different states' taxes, total taxes. So we're not just talking the state income tax, which is usually the one that gets all the attention, but as you all well know, there are many, many other taxes that affect us in terms of sales tax and local real estate taxes and so on and so forth. And one of the links that dropped in is a really nice comparison of that across all states.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to swing back because as we spoke about the federal money coming in that would be helping New York State, and that's a one-shot deal. There's another thing that perhaps Fred and Melanie, the two of you may best speak to this, has to do with Governor Cuomo's proposed temporary personal income tax high earner surcharge. Now, why isn't this a good idea, or is it a good idea relative to the IONY campaign? Fred, maybe you want to speak to that first. You'll unmute yourself.
Thank you. First of all, it is a relatively modest proposal as far as the revenue that it generates, and you know, as I recall, it kind of gets rebated out in the out years also. So you know, I think I just I don't think anybody saw that in either house, at least in the majority, saw that as a serious you know, revenue proposal, and you know, it was quickly rejected simply because it was, you know, as I said, did not generate much in the way of revenue, and you know, was you know, didn't seem to be a good faith effort at making the code more progressive. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, Melanie, anything to add to that?
You know, I would just add to it that the legislature seems to be taking our deficit very seriously. You know, even more of our folks that are usually very risk averse, our senators are talking about raising revenue. So I think, you know, Assemblymember Thiele, you're absolutely right. I think most folks saw it as a bad faith effort and really a detractor from the effort to have a serious conversation about raising revenue.
Yeah, it's kind of like an interest-free loan to New York
Good
State.
description, actually, of that proposal. So.
It's kind of crazy. So, okay. The other argument I hear that's very strong that I think would be helpful to address is that if we do this, the wealthy are going to move. They're going to leave New York State and we won't have any money or anyone to tax. And I guess this goes back again to Fred and perhaps Melanie, primarily on answering this question.
Well, I guess the first thing I would say with regard to that is that I was probably the sponsor of one of the most progressive taxes ever implemented, and that is the Community Preservation Fund, which is a 2% real estate transfer tax on real estate transactions out here on the East End that gets utilized for land conservation and water quality protection. And I would say that 90 to 95% of that tax gets paid by wealthy second homeowners who would probably be the subject of most of the initiatives that we're talking about tonight. So I would just point out that they were willing to pay roughly $140 million to 5 towns that have a population of 140,000 people just to be here, not to leave here, to be here. And by the way, they, the real estate market has never been hotter for.
Oops, I think Fred has frozen. Well, Melanie, why don't you go ahead and pick up?
Okay, sure. Just a couple of things on that. First being, there have been many studies done to see if, ultra millionaires and billionaires leave when taxes are imposed. And what we have found is that that is absolutely not true. Occasionally, you may have 1 or 2 leave, but it is statistically insignificant when you're talking about from a revenue perspective. It's just important to note that like New Jersey has a higher income tax rate than we do here in New York. The other thing that I think is important to talk about when we have this conversation is that really wealthy people, people that have an abundance of income to do what they please, have a very different mindset than most of us middle classers, right? We look at our financial situation and we think, holy moly, if I get this tax, I don't know if I can afford to live here. That's why we would have to move, because we couldn't afford to live here. That is just not the case with ultra wealthy folks. They want to be close to family. They want to be close to their job. They want to be close to great cities. And I would be surprised if anyone on this call disagrees with me, but New York City is the greatest city in the world. You may have another favorite city somewhere, but it's definitely in your top 3. For me, it's my top favorite city in the world. And people are willing to pay a premium to live close to it. So I think, that is important. And the idea, frankly, I think it's a bad faith oppositional fear tactic to say, well, all of these, rich folks are going to leave the state. I just want to really hammer home this point that these bills are not meant to penalize. I know sometimes we hear that. Well, why are we penalizing? We're not penalizing. If anything, middle class folks are shouldering an unproportional amount of the tax burden in our state. What these bills seek to do is just equalize it and create a more fair balance.
Yeah. And I think that, more importantly, wealthy people, everyone wants to live in a state that has better transportation, school, housing. You don't have poverty all around you to look at. You don't want to live there, particularly if you're wealthy. So they want to be around where a state is providing those reasonable services. Do we get Fred back yet?
Not yet, but so let's keep moving forward with some questions for Steve and for Lars.
Yeah, okay. So Lars, maybe you can talk more about what this would mean, expand a little more what this would mean for families on the East End to have this additional funding year after year going forward, the revenue.
So predictability is an important thing we talk about with our Board of Education and our community who wants to start a program or offer something for kids. And as we've experienced in the 11 years I've been superintendent and prior to that as a building administrator, the funding streams are inconsistent. The 2% property tax cap since it's been in since 2012 or 13, we've only seen it hit 2% twice. So it fluctuates. It goes like that. And then when the governor releases his budget every January, we all get in the car and head up to Albany and advocate and get in the elevator of the legislative office building to advocate for more money. And we get as much as we can and we go back and then we do something with it. And then next year, the following January, it starts again. And so we become very scared to offer something because what we giveth, we don't want to then taketh away. An example in Hampton Bays, after in the Great Recession, and which coincided at the time when we opened Hampton Bays Middle School, elementary school band fell off the radar of the elementary school because the music teacher went over to the middle school, the band teacher went over to the middle school, and a cost-saving measure to open this new school was to not have a band teacher in the elementary school. We worked years to get that back, and we were very hesitant to offer it back until we were certain we could continue it. And so so reliability is something that is important. For families, I think it speaks to exactly what Melanie had just said. Middle-class families say, we can't afford to live here anymore. And we can't find a place to rent because the rents are out of control. And they were getting there before the pandemic, and it just took off once the pandemic set in. So to a family, it allows them the opportunity to stay here. To a homeowner, it allows their property taxes to be mitigated against. The average property tax rate per $1,000 of your house in Southampton town is about $6. In Hampton Bays, it's $12. So on an average $500,000 home in Hampton Bays, we'll pay the same amount of school taxes as $1 million home elsewhere. There's a disparate situation there. It provides an unequal experience for kids. And so when we're talking about, and when you have a community that has more students in poverty, more students learning the language, you have to meet those basic needs first before you can get to fencing and bowling and STEM and engineering. They're always on our list of what we want to have in our school district. We have to attend to the needs first. I need a bilingual social worker to help my families navigate basic services and needs and help my kids with their basic social emotional learning. So for families, it gives reliability. If we mitigate the property taxes that families make, it makes their survivability in a community in a school district that much more certain, I think.
Thank you. Well, it's time for audience participants' questions.
Jerry, I'm just going to hop back in and let you know that Fred is here in case there's a question that you wanted to ask him before we shift over there.
Okay, because actually, Fred just didn't get to finish what he was saying. I switched over to Melanie. So, Fred, was there any final thoughts that you want to finish?
I'm sure I was in the middle of saying something really profound, but now it's completely escaped me. But I think we were talking about people leaving the state of New York, and I was talking about the CPF and how that had worked. And I would just say this. Listen, this isn't completely inelastic. We have to try to find the right balance as we try to come up with the right tax policy. But when New York had difficulties in the past, after 9/11 and after the Great Recession, we went to, increasing the PIT and a millionaire's tax. And it was the same thing was said then. It was that, people would leave and never come back. And, it didn't happen that way. And, but that's not to say that, we do have to find a balance, obviously. And it's not open-ended, but I think that's what the discussion is about here, and in the legislature is trying to make our code more progressive and find the right balance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so Julie is going to handle our participant questions from the chat.
Yeah, you know what? Before Julie weighs in, I just want to give a shout out to Representative Steve Englebright, who is here with us this evening. We appreciate your time and attention to this important issue. So thank you for that, and I'll send it over to Julie.
If I could also, Assemblyman Mike Fitzpatrick is also on here tonight.
Wonderful.
And so I always kid the both of them when we're usually at the Longwood School breakfast, which Lars Clemensen will know because he's always there. But Steve and Mike Fitzpatrick are kind of my counterpoint on a lot of issues. So they're on the opposite side of issues, and I suspect including this one. But I did want to recognize that Mike was here tonight. We don't agree a lot, but we're good friends, so which we need more of in politics. So.
Thanks for pointing that out, Fred. We appreciate it, and we definitely appreciate the time. It's important to be able to have these kinds of conversations together. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Well, Representative Englebright, one of your constituents, is also on the call and was asking if you would share your thoughts on these 6 revenue-raising bills.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
First, thanks to my colleague Fred Thiele for his initiative and leadership, not just on this, but on so many things. It's a pleasure to have a chance to serve with you. And Mike, we disagree a lot, but that keeps the process vigorous. And so it's not a bad thing, and you bring certainly integrity to the process, even if you bring confusion at the same time. Of these several bills, the general theme, I think, of adjusting to the new realities of our tax requirements and fairness basically suggests that these are bills that we should support. I support most of them. The one I have concern about is the stock transfer tax reinstatement. We have 1/3 of the state's economic activity comes through the stock market, and the stock market could easily be moved, and they have threatened to do so if this tax is reinstated. So at the moment, I'm very cautious about that. I don't want to crater the state's economy, damage everything that we're trying to support. And so I'm cautious, particularly on that particular tax. The other ones seem to me to be in the right direction. I want to study them more closely before signing off on them absolutely. But the presentation earlier was compelling, and our need after this year with the federal money coming in, we should be okay this year, but the year after this year, we're going to have to be on our own. And that means we're going to have new revenue, or speaking of cratering, everything we care about is going to start to crater. Our schools, our universities, roads, healthcare. So the search for fairness is also the search for a positive future. Fairness, I think, is essentially writ large at the top of the page for these proposed new taxes and fees, for the most part.
So follow up from I guess, Fred, one of your constituents then, the FTT is maybe the most controversial bill, or at least in this little group. Where are you on that one?
Yeah, I would say this, of the 6 bills that are there, the 2, I would add to it, and it's recognized because it's a constitutional amendment. There are legal issues with the wealth tax, whether we could impose that in this budget cycle. And I think there's a recognition that there's a need for a constitutional amendment. So that and the stock transfer tax are clearly the 2 most controversial pieces of this package. You know, the PIT, the personal income tax, is, you know, is tried and true, and I'd say that it has the broadest support in the legislature. Recapturing some of the stuff, some of the money back from the federal tax cuts on corporate taxes, capital gains. Those are the ones that I think have the broadest base of support. You know, and Steve alluded to this, you know, if I was going to make a prediction, and we haven't finished our work yet on our one House bill, but, you know, my sense of it is that the stock transfer tax, the Wall Street tax, might not make the cut because there is that level of uncertainty about it. So, and I, you know, just by following the chat, I was kind of, you know, I'm listening to everybody, I'm following the chat, I'm watching the back and forth on selling short and all of this and the impacts and this and that. So, you know, even in this forum, there's a lot of back and forth on that. So, and I think what we're looking for in revenue is certainty. We want to be able to collect, you know, we make a projection, we want to make sure it's there. And the, you know, the corporate tax, the income tax, the capital gains, I think people feel confident that, you know, the concerns that Steve Engelbart raised about, you know, the impact on Wall Street, a lot of members have that concern. And, you know, it's a fair concern, I think. And so we'll see what happens, but, you know, that's kind of my take on that.
Great. And then I'll ask Melanie if you would just follow up with any more thoughts on the FTT tax in particular. And then we also had a question from Tina about details on the inheritance tax. If you could talk a little bit more about the rates for that and the levels.
Sure, a little bit I can. So just quickly on the financial transaction tax, this is always a fun topic of conversation. And I really appreciate hearing all of the points of view. I truly do. What I would just like to say is, you know, as we're talking about the Invest in Our New York Act, there's a reason that these bills are not earmarked, right? And that reason is because we are pushing for all of the bills to be passed so that we have the largest pool of money to actually create a thriving New York. Because what we all know is that, you know, years and years of austerity has forced municipalities and localities to shoulder a lot of the burden. We constantly see taxes going up. We see services getting cut. We see schools with roofs falling in all over Long Island, even in the wealthiest communities. So I just want to stress that piece of it, right? Because not passing one or not fighting for one of these bills or 3 of these bills, even, like, the buck stops somewhere, right? Like, if we don't expand the pot of money, that means we're going to be pulling money from different resources. So I do want to put that out there. Regarding the inheritance tax, I think I went over it a little bit. I think at $500,000, there's a 2.5% tax. And I'm not sure how it goes, but I do know it's a very small tax up until we get into the millions of dollars. I'm happy to look for a resource and follow it up. But if there's a specific question someone wants to throw in the chat, if I can answer it, I'm happy to do that.
I just want to supplement what Melanie said. I've put into the chat. I hope everyone's got access to it. I know if you're on a phone, you might not. The slides from which Melanie slides and more, and even more details come from. So there's in the chat, both as a report and as slide sets, all of this material is already, you can download it yourself clicking off the chat with the details of the cut points for each of the taxes and who's affected how.
Great. And Melanie, if you don't mind putting a source in the chat, that would be awesome. Back to schools with a couple of questions, one for Lars and one for Lars and Fred. from Lynn, have you guys explored doing solar arrays on the Hampton Bays schools? You're familiar with this issue. So if you would talk a little bit about that. And then the follow-up question is going to be about how realistic you think it is to fund schools from income taxes or general revenues instead of localized property taxes.
The short answer to the question is yes. So solar is on our agenda, and it was on our agenda this week. We actually met with our engineers. We have 2 roofs that we've just replaced, because to Melanie's point, in some places they were a little Swiss cheesy, and we needed new roofs, and we didn't want to put solar panels on and then have to rip the roof off. So we are in process of doing that. The school districts engage in what are called energy performance contracts, and so can use their general fund budgets to conduct projects that are deemed by the state education department and their engineers as energy rateable, and you save money on them over an 18-year repay period. So instead of paying all that money in electricity, you're paying some in electricity and then some for the improvements that you made, like glazing on your windows or solar panels. And so the 18-year rebate, the 18-year payback window, solar was harder to get to fit into that model, but the technology is such now that state education department's behind it. We're getting ready to move forward. I'll jump in and then I'll toss it over to Fred about personal income tax revenues that come from the state. We have the foundation formula that, as Fred had mentioned at the beginning, was built to address inequities between a district that is maybe has a higher need population or is in a really rural area, for example, upstate, but it's not working right now. It's not fully funded. And so what you have is the burden of school budgets being built on the property taxes of their local residents. So 90 cents of the dollar comes from property tax owners. Every dollar that comes from state revenue, whether it's a personal income tax and it's fed through the foundation formula, or in another way that the legislature works out, is a dollar that isn't coming from a 3-bedroom ranch versus a 30,000 square foot estate, maybe to the east of us a little bit. So it would be a little bit of a playing field leveler for between districts.
Yeah, the issue of the funding education through the income taxes instead of the property tax, on its face, I think has a lot of appeal, right? Because the income tax is a progressive tax, better reflects people's ability to pay. The property tax, as we all know, is certainly more regressive, doesn't necessarily reflect people's ability to pay. People can be, especially on the East End, can be land rich and cash poor. There's also a certain subjectivity to the assessment of real property that can be maddening to people. So, the income tax has always had an appeal, but there's a reason why it hasn't happened. Because it's a fairly radical departure, and a couple of things come up, and one is that, well, if you based raising taxes for schools based on income, we've got a lot of property wealth out here, people that are second homeowners. East of the Shinnecock Canal, almost 70% of all the houses in my district are second homes, but they may not be their tax homes for income tax purposes. So would you be able to, access that revenue? Or if you're going to set up a system, maybe a countywide system or a statewide system, where, okay, you collect the income tax on that basis, and then you'd have to count on it being sent back to you. Especially on the East End, there's not that much trust in the county government or the state government that the money would actually come back. So it's more complicated than it seems. And I think, a couple of things I would say. One is what Lars said, if we would fully fund the foundation formula and update it, which is designed to, eliminate the inequities so that the quality of education that you get isn't based on where you live, that would be a step in the right direction. And one of the reasons why you look at invest in our New York, because that would be one way to fully fund the foundation aid formula. So, I think, that, certainly, and the other thing is, if you can't get rid of the property tax, at least make it fair. Have a circuit breaker program so that people based on their income don't pay too much, and that money comes back to them. So, I mean, there are other ways, I think, to inject fairness. Suffice it to say, the income tax is a way of solely funding education. Has been talked about for a long time, and no one's ever been able to overcome some of the issues that have been raised. I think there's also the fear of the unknown. But there are other ways other than completely overhauling the system by which I think we can make it fairer. And that may be pragmatically the more productive way to go.
And the last question from Denny from the chat that I think everyone here will be very interested in hearing about. And Fred, I'll ask you to speak first. If others have thoughts, chime in. There's only $7 billion in progressive tax increases in the 2 one-house budgets, which is not enough. What can we do with the time that's left?
Well, first of all, I saw that story, and as Steve Engelbright can attest to, we're not done yet with the one house bill. Revenue is getting discussed tomorrow. So, the one thing that I think both Assemblyman Engelbright and I think even Assemblyman Fitzpatrick would attest to, that, compared with prior speakers in the New York State Assembly, Speaker Hastie has been very member focused, and that when members make suggestions, and we've seen this throughout our one house budget process, members have a lot more to say. So I wouldn't necessarily say that anything is written in stone yet, as far as the one house. And by the way, the one houses are still just the one house. There still has to be a final budget. And but your question really is it's politics 101. Contact your legislator, your individual legislator, and New York is a very wide and diverse state. Steve and I see that every day. We have colleagues in upstate New York and out in Western New York near Buffalo, and their districts are different than New York City district. Long Island is different than the Capital District. So, I think across the state, contact your legislators. And, the one last thing that I would leave with is, as far as, we've got a diverse coalition here. And you don't always get everything you want, but I think we still have the chance to make it better, even over what was proposed in that article. So I would just keep plugging. I think the coalition has done a great job in highlighting this issue and getting legislators involved, and first and foremost, just getting people to discuss these bills and discuss these issues. And we talked about the Community Preservation Fund. If you don't get everything you want this year, everybody always, the Community Preservation Fund, what a great idea. Yeah, it was an overnight sensation that took me 10 years to pass. Okay, so you have to stick with this stuff, and you make progress each and every year. And I'm not suggesting this is going to take 10 years, but it doesn't all happen in 1 year either. So those would be my comments and my advice, I think.
Okay, great. Well, Julie, I guess this takes us to the time where we're going to have our call to action. And we were supposed to be putting in the chat, of course, all your contact information for all of you of all the Long Island legislators, so that you can be contacting them. But Melanie was going to lead us with a call to action here of what we all can do to help make this happen. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Jerry. So I'm going to piggyback on what Assemblyman Thiel just said. Calling your legislators right now is going to be of the utmost importance, but go a step further and talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to them about what's at stake. Because right now we have this tremendous opportunity to push for revenue bills that, could really transform our state. So I can't stress that enough. Make the calls every day, get everyone you know to make the calls. And if you really like calling, I hope that you will consider joining the Invest in Our New York Coalition to make calls on Monday night. Joe, are you gonna drop the sign up in the chat if you don't mind? We're going to be making calls, phone banking. I know most of you probably miss it since election season was a few months ago. So it'll give you a chance to exercise the fingers and start dialing. We can really use your help. It's interesting that Assemblyman Thiel said, the One House budget isn't done yet. I just got a text message that said it's being printed tonight. So there's all kinds of rumors flying everywhere.
We haven't even discussed revenue yet. We
right.
have not.
But what we're hearing, and I don't know, Assemblyman, if you can weigh in on this, we are hearing that, by end of day on the 15th, it should be complete. I don't know if that's another rumor or not. So these next few days.
I do think it will get done next week. I think the schedule you were hearing, that was our original schedule. And we were supposed to discuss revenue today. I think they were going to, based on our input, it would be, we'd look to, finalize it, shortly thereafter, and then we were going to vote on Monday. I think that a lot of that might get pushed back, and I don't want to change the subject. And I frankly have, I think both Steve and I have probably heard enough about this today. But all we talked about today was impeachment. All right, so we didn't talk about the budget today, and which is another item for another day. So there's the revenue. The revenue package is not finalized.
Okay.
I assure you. I'm not saying there's a lot of time left, because there isn't on the One House, but the One Houses are important, but they're not final either. That's the other thing I would just say.
So I'm hearing we may have an extra day or two to sway some of our legislators. So
yeah, I think that's true.
I'm hearing that's good news. So please join us. You certainly can reach out to Catherine or both Catherines to try to figure out how to get involved. If you don't know your legislators' phone numbers, we're absolutely happy to pass that along to you. This is the time to make some noise. Think of this as like GOTV. That's where we're in right now. We are in GOTV. We need to, or I guess we would say, I don't know, not V, but we need to get, well, I guess, yeah, we need them to vote for us. And we need to get out the vote. We need to get our legislators to sponsor these bills, or, certainly commit to fighting for them. Call, tell your personal story, tell them why it's important to you. If you need additional information, we're happy to provide it. I'm happy to have conversations with anybody this week if you want to talk more in depth about the bills, or put you in touch with someone who might be able to give you more information. But please, whatever you do, don't stay on the couch. We need you off the couch. We need you in the game. We need you involved. So thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Sackman right now, if that's okay, Jerry.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Joe is going to give us a direct action to do right now.
Everybody, okay, so if you have Twitter, I just dropped some sample tweets that you can send out. Also a retweet from Rebecca Balin, who is the campaign manager. It'd be great if you could retweet that. If you scroll up, you'll find them there. I also dropped in links how to find your senator and your assembly member. We also have a sign up for the phone bank on March 15th, which is going to be a pretty big phone bank. It's going to be with the Campaign for New York Health Act, the IONY campaign, NIPAN, and others are all co-hosting this. So if you can get on that, help us out there, that would be huge. We'll be reaching out to constituents who will then be reaching out to their legislators to get them to support. We also have a statewide action on March 23rd. You can sign up for this. Some of us will be going up to Albany, others of us won't, but you can do some digital actions. So you can click on that link there and sign up for that. Just you can share social media that day. You could attend a town hall or whatever it might be that we have scheduled for that on the 23rd. The more of us that make noise, all the better. And I have one other action here we're going to share out. There's going to be a teach-in if you want to know more about these bills. We're going a little more in depth on a teach-in on the 23rd. The 23rd. So if you want to attend that, Melanie and I will be doing that teach-in with Together We Will, another organization here on Long Island, and you can sign up there for that. We'll go into more depth on the bills. So you'll find all the links here. And the simplest action you could take right now is tweeting if you can tweet, and or calling your state rep and letting them know. Fred Thiele said, one-on-ones. Let them know you want this done. And if Fred or Steve is your legislator, let them know right now. All right. So and thank them. Especially Fred's been a champion for this. We really appreciate that. We've dropped his op-ed, shared that op-ed out. It's important that they know that we appreciate the work they've been doing, and that's it.
Yeah.
So
take
action.
Sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Zacchaeus Shakir is here with us tonight, and she's from AQE, which is one of our co-sponsors. And if you want to take 1 minute,
Yeah,
that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. AQE is about 20 years old this year, and we were the organizing arm for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. So thank you, Assemblymember Thiele. Like, it was really phenomenal to hear you. Assemblymember Engelbright sounded like he was close to signing on to some. So it was just really wonderful to meet all of you and Lars as well. Just a few things. One, I want to co-sign on everything Melanie shared about an Invest in Now New York. Specifically around education, we really are fighting to bring home the billions of dollars owed from the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, but also to ensure that for all 4-year-olds across New York State have access to high quality pre-K, early childhood education, and also say real quick, one is that while different cities have different issue areas, harm to children should impact us all. We should want to change that and not have any child be harmed by us not fully investing in their education, right? That's one. I don't care if it's in the North Country, in Hempstead, or New York City or whatever. Any child being harmed by us making a choice not to fully fund their schools is on us as adults. Right? If a budget is a moral document that we're not doing right by our children, as with the proposed budget of Governor Cuomo, which was a $0 increase in state funding. Fortunately, he's not the only one. We have an Assembly and a Senate who can make sure that New York State invests in our public schools, right? And then lastly, I'll just say that as all the rigor and the vigor and excitement and the chatter around why we can't do something on revenue, I hope we turn that into something to say, how are we going to make sure that we do pass revenue? Because it's very easy to say that the super wealthy and others will leave, we're harming them or whatever. This is not a penalty, as Melanie shared, right? These budgets have been built on our backs, the middle class backs, for decades. So it's time for other folks in this moment of pain, trauma, right, to do something about that, right? And so I just wanted to share that in hopes that, yes, please call your state elected official. It's not too late, as the Assembly member shared. Tell them it's time to invest in our New York. We can tax the ultra wealthy and leave the scarcity mindset in the past, because it hasn't done well by many communities, especially Black, brown, and poor children. This is the time to invest and transform education into the new transformative way, not the old way we used to educate some children and not all children.
Thank you. That was great. Okay. So, Catherine, do you have a couple of closing remarks?
First of all, yeah, thank you. First of all, amen to what Zacchaeus just said. Really, I hope everyone takes that to heart. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, for having an open mind, for those who came unaware of the bills or skeptical. I want to put out a very great thanks to our panelists, to Fred, to Lars, to Steve, to Melanie, for taking their time to help educate people about these really transformative bills that will make such a difference in the lives of so many struggling New Yorkers that really have, as has just been said, been carrying the burden for far too long. And we are the richest state in the country. We can make this happen. So let's do what Joe and Melanie has suggested in terms of contacting, tweeting, calling. And we have our, the next 5 days that we can maybe make some things happen, maybe change some minds and some hearts on this. I've just dropped in the chat for those of you who would like to join PEER. There's a link where you can become a member, and members are allowed to vote on critical issues within the group. And I dropped in the chat also information about our meeting next month, which will be on the 20th of April. And you can register at that link, and we will be discussing the group PEER's plans going forward into the next quarter about where we want to focus our energies. So right now, our energies are focused on Invest in Our New York campaign and the New York Health campaign. And it's great to see them bridging together as they are. I want everyone to know that if you can save the chat so that you're able to save all this great information that's been dropped in there and get the tweet that you need to send out to your senator or your assembly person, and all of the other documents. So thank you all for taking your time, for caring about helping schools, helping healthcare, and helping the 99% of us. So have a good evening and let's get to work. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Lars.
Great.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Hug your baby for us.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, and good night.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.